So I've listened to countless business and entrepreneurial podcasts myself, and I'm always interested to hear from a lot of these entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I've noticed about pretty much all of them is they bring in the entrepreneur when they're already a success, and they usually talk about the success of the business, but they don't really show the struggle. And I think a lot of people in this world in general look at a lot of successful people and think they fell out of their mother and they're in that situation and it was kind of handed to them in some way. But a lot of people don't realize is all of the failure, all of the sleepless nights, all of the attempts at things you thought were 100% all the way, and then it bombs. And I think I'd like to focus on that. And one of the great opportunities being in the domain business and being a domain broker is I've had the opportunity to speak to entrepreneurs, other people in different parts of businesses, and hearing their stories. And I'd like to talk to them and open up my Rolodex, kind of dating myself by saying that, and talking to people that have been through that and talk about some of their success, but also the struggle. And fittingly enough, one of the first entrepreneurs I met in the domain business over 10 years ago, we're dating ourselves here again, Yanni, back in 2010 is actually 13 years ago in May for me. I've had the opportunity to watch this entrepreneur, Yanni Belislav here that we have, grow as an entrepreneur, looking him to amass his portfolio of domains. He's gotten into many things like crypto, NFTs, real estate, and I've also got to see our relationship grow not just from business, but as friendship. And now I've also got to see him become a father with his newest challenge of twins that are 6 months old, right? And
Yeah.
so Yanni, you started really late in the domain business in comparison to many. A lot of people used to say Frank Schilling, who I used to work with, started late, and he started in 2002. You started 3 years later than that, pretty much. And but dabbling a little bit prior, and you've amassed a portfolio just under 100,000 domain names. So why don't we just start with, when did you start to realize that domains had value, and then kind of getting going in a very quick summary of that in your beginnings, and then let's get into some of the other good stuff.
So I must have started dabbling in domains maybe 2002, but I was just even understanding the concept of domains and what they were, because back then also, I was a teenager and I was like, I heard there's people who make money online, and it's not like now where there's all these options. Really, online is the way that people really communicate, all this e-commerce and so on. Nobody was buying anything online back then.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually no opportunity. So there's some things like some random affiliate programs, eBay, some random, very, very kind of like niche markets. And I was, doing a lot of affiliate things, or at least by doing, trying. And the biggest problem was actually getting traffic, because back then there is no, there is no way to buy traffic from Google. AdSense didn't happen yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's no even clear way of where traffic comes from. You could effectively pay for some directory listings. It was kind of all over the place. There is no social media at all. So, one interesting way that I figured out, effectively through the grapevine of how to get traffic is through domain names. And so, in other words, if I had an affiliate program, back then, I remember there was some stuff with MP3 downloads or something like that. And if you had a good MP3 domain, for some reason there was traffic there. I didn't really understand it.
What was it, Winamp?
Well, so it wasn't Winamp, but it would be I don't know if you remember back in the day, there was all this torrent stuff just became very, very popular.
And Kazoo.
So exactly. So you would have even something like Supernova, all these kind of original websites, like Pirate Bay.
Pirate Bay.
So effectively you take one of those, either a typo or, sometimes it would be the more correct spelling, because Supernova used super without the .org. So there's obviously better versions that you can actually buy that are, more legit domain names. Effectively, you could take it, turn it around, send it to the affiliate program, and then effectively you're getting sales. I mean, how much sales, that's a whole other angle, but effectively at zero cost besides the investment cost of buying the domain.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting, because I've never actually run across like anything like that, actually even comparable, meaning that you have an asset that produces traffic. But at the same time, it was still kind of like a very niche thing, because you have this one affiliate program, and then you're trying to find domains that would correspond to it. But, like effectively it's one off here and there, even though some of them would be pretty big ones. But then 2004.
So let's go back. So you were like
happened.
19. You were like 19 years old back then when you.
No, so back then I was like 16.
Okay, so how much money did you really have going into this?
Well,
Like
not much. Yeah.
$100?
So this is like, but keep in mind that effectively anything I was making, I was putting back into this, because I had effectively zero overhead. All my money was going towards, I don't know, like going to a movie theater, like buying some shoes.
Yeah, just bullshit.
Yeah, and back then it's not like there is like even like iPhones or anything. Like effectively it was very, very cheap to live as a teenager.
Yeah.
Especially when my parents are effectively covering all my real expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's other things that aren't as convenient, because I remember even back then, my dad didn't like that I was spending so much time on the computer, because effectively ever since my family moved to Canada, which would be like in the year 2000,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly I got internet access.
Yeah.
And also I was bored and I was a teenager, so I was spending all this time. So my dad effectively charged me a tax of 1 minute on the computer is one push-up. Wow. So I was doing a lot of push-ups because I wanted to be online. So
you must have been shredded.
Well, so there was a lot of friction back then, like beyond, so there's some good things, I guess, about living with your parents as a teenager. And then there's some things that are really kind of interfering with getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
But, so it was hard to scale this, because it would be individual domain names for individual affiliate programs. And then let's say the affiliate program closes or stops converting. Then what do you do? Like you're stuck with this domain name. It has traffic, but sometimes you can send it somewhere else. Sometimes that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Like in other words, for example, I forget the exact names now, but it would be something like there was a drop shipping company called Distribution Wholesale, like that was their name, .com,
mm-hmm.
and I had wholesale distribution. And effectively I was, like that was very easy one. Like, and I don't remember the names, but it was something like this, like effectively 2 generic names, and I had the opposite.
Yeah.
And that was doing very well. And by very well, I'm talking about like tens of dollars a month.
Yeah.
but then what happened is that they rebranded to like something shorter, and then that domain effectively slowly went to zero.
Yeah.
So
the diamond in your pile is gone now.
Yeah, exactly. So, but then 2004 AdSense happened. So very soon after AdSense for domains happened, and then effectively the tap really unleashed, because then I ran across domain sponsor, and then I was seeing effectively the ability to monetize all type of traffic. Like it didn't matter what you had. There was a way to monetize it, because there was somebody buying this traffic. So that's when I started really getting into this. So this is maybe 2004, 2005.
And you're in college.
2004, so 2004, I was effectively just started going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess also before I was in high school, so I was kind of not really taking it so seriously. Then 2005, 2004, 2005, I started taking it seriously. In 2005, I would say this was actually a really full-time job for me.
So you're going to class, living in the dorm, partying, and doing this. Like was that pretty much?
Well, yeah. So I didn't live in the dorm, and then also what ended up happening is that sometimes there would be something like I don't remember even when it was, but sometimes in 2005 there was a major drop of domain names. So or 2006, and over a period of 3 days. So pretty much, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to school.
Yeah.
Like this is more important. Like there are pivotal moments in which you're forced to choose. And, like it was very obvious that I was choosing this. Yeah, so that was pretty much effectively when I was already hooked, because also 2005, 2006, I started going, flying to conferences. Back then it's traffic. And it was just crazy to me, because also keep in mind I was in college for, quote unquote business.
Yep.
But it was crazy to me that how much more practical knowledge I was gaining just going to a conference, networking with people, compared to from my classes. And, pragmatically it makes sense, because obviously the person who's teaching business, like, I wasn't going to like Harvard or anything. So you don't have professors doing it for some sort of prestige. So obviously the ones that are
some of them have probably never even run a business before. They just read about
yeah. So they're either
in
not that interested in it, or they're not that good in it. I mean, this is like effectively with business, it's a little bit of an oxymoron, I guess. So yeah, so then it became kind of like a waste of my time. But I decided to finish it, so I finished it in 2007. In 2007, I would also say it would be probably peak for all the domain traffic valuation. That's what I would call it.
You're saying the highest payouts that parking was paying was 2007, you believe?
In terms of RPM.
Yeah. So for people, RPM is revenue per 1,000 visitors.
Yes. So because I mean, I guess it was still kind of a culmination of this 2004 AdSense onwards, and then 2007 effectively was also peak of the general market. And then, like the crash happened in the real estate market, and so did everything. But then, effectively the parking market never really came back, because the revenue was going down on parking, and Yahoo was also losing its market share. So Google was gaining more of a stranglehold on the market, a little bit of a monopoly. And yeah, like why should they pay more than just a little bit more than Yahoo? Because either way, they're gaining that traffic. So yeah, I mean, so pretty much I saw then 2007 to 2010 a huge decline effectively in revenue. I mean, even back then, let's say a portfolio that I had in maybe 2007 compared to 2010, it declined maybe 75% in terms of revenue. And then, and that's even nothing, because if I look at that portfolio compared to, let's say, whatever is left of that portfolio now, the decline is probably, I don't know, 98%.
So what kind of money were you making at your peak, do you think, on that portfolio? And then you probably thought, I mean, you were the best at the time, right? I mean,
yeah, it's hard to say, but like I was making 6 figures a month effectively on maybe my last year in college.
So what were you doing when you're sitting there in class having to study for a test and you're making?
Well, so that's why the whole thing is a little bit bizarre, because effectively, especially something like business. I mean, you cannot teach people to be entrepreneurs by following some sort of guideline, because if this was the correct guideline to become an entrepreneur, everybody would do it and do it successfully. So in other words, like being an entrepreneur is just like pure trial and error. Like there is no way around it. And you kind of have to pave your own path, because again, if the path was already there, there would be no opportunity there, and then this whole thing would be futile.
Okay, so at the age of 25, 26 years old, you have achieved something that really less than 1% of the population will ever achieve in business is having a business that does over $1 million in revenue in a year, right? So you're 25, you've mastered something that, again, the 1% hits, and then all of a sudden your earnings go from that and go down
No.
to 25.
So 2007, I was still like really 20 years old.
Yeah.
So this was actually then, and I was kind of 21. So I was kind of baffled, like, okay, what does that even mean in terms of like, what am I going to do afterwards? And this is before even thinking like, oh, like this can go down. Like in a way, I kind of wasn't really thinking about it too much because, and it wasn't like, oh, next day everything is down 75%. It's like, okay, this month we're down 1%. Okay, big deal. Next month we're down another 1% from the previous month. Okay, well, it's probably going to come back. So it's this type of slow churn that you don't really notice, and then you do like kind of like an aggregate comparison of year after year. You're like, okay, this is a bigger chunk, and then like multiple years, you're like, wow, this is
Bad news.
effectively trending towards zero. And
Yeah.
the real issue is that effectively the same thing that made it possible for it to be profitable to begin with, that's also the weakness, meaning that relying on somebody like Google for this distribution, because you can effectively sell them traffic in any topic, in any geo effectively. This is also what made it a problem, because you're relying on them and they can cut you off, or they can pay you a little bit less, or they can pay you a lot less.
And what are you going to do?
But really, if you have no other option, it's not like there's 5 different Googles and they're all competing and you can just kind of like run some sort of auction process.
Mm-hmm.
You're effectively tied up to them, and if they tell you this is what you get paid, this is what you get paid.
Yeah.
So, effectively, so also keep in mind that since I was going for traffic names, I kind of didn't care what they, look like. Like, if I had, let's say if I bought Jeff.com, obviously it's good. But if I bought Jeff with 5 Fs.com and that one is generating like $50 a day, like that's the name I wanted.
Yeah.
So, so really there were some generic names that I ended up with, but, it's just coincidental just because they happen to be names with traffic. So I wasn't really going after generic names, and hence I didn't have many sales really. I mean, there are almost no sales. So at that point, 2007, 2010, let's say 95% plus of my revenue is parking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I mean, once 2010 hit already, I was like, okay, we need to pivot somehow, because if this trend continues, it becomes effectively zero over time. And well, effectively, I was thinking like, obviously there's big portfolios like Frank Schilling and so on, and they generate some of their revenue from sales. And sales also seems to be kind of like a more reliable source of revenue, because you control it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody can cut you off, because every time when you sell a domain, you're selling it to an individual person. And even if you don't have distribution, like through, Afternic and whatever else, at the end of the day, you can just sell it to people directly, because you control the actual domain name of what results in that domain name, and hence you control the actual sales lender, if you have a sales lender out there. So I like that concept, like effectively almost like self-sovereignty of your cash flow. So then I decided, okay, technically I kind of started in generic domains, I think like 2009, because there was I can get into this story. It's kind of a little bit weird. I forget even what forum it was on. So it was either on Domain Name Forum or Name Pros. And, a long time ago, I looked up, as part of this process of being a domainer, I've done a lot of random research about things that turn out
Go
to
down the
be
old rabbit
nothing
hole.
and very boring and useless and a waste of my time. But sometimes there's some interesting information. Like, I mean, so this was, for example, nothing. Like when I was researching that CC domains, I looked up because so that's CC is Coco Islands, obviously, but it's very scientifically bought the rights to be selling those domains on a global scale. And then at some point I looked up all the CC domains that are 2 characters, and VeriSign owned all of them. So I was thinking, okay, it makes sense because at some point VeriSign took back all the 2-character .coms and .nets. Mm-hmm. So they probably didn't want to make the same mistake here in case it gets big. So effectively they held on to all of them. So, one day on one of those forums, I see somebody with 100 .cc names, and he has them for sale, and it's all 2 characters and effectively all the best combinations, like US.cc, EU.cc, CC.cc. And I was like, okay, this is weird, because I was pretty sure I remember VeriSign owning all of them. I look up the whois. Yeah, the whois changed on those. Okay, so then I reach out to this guy, and I was like, okay, what? I'll buy CC.cc from you. So I end up buying CC.cc because it's kind of like, obviously when you get to these types of things, it's very unique because there's very few combinations, particularly 5 or something, that where you have a repeat letter and it's the same letter on both sides. So obviously this is like a very, very unique name. And, and obviously keep in mind that CC, it sucks. It's not great. But once you get into 2 letters, what are really your options? Like you have .com. Okay, so you're talking about like mid 6 figures to 7 figures, maybe 8 figures. Then you get .net. Okay, it's like effectively, like maybe 1/20th, 1/30th of that, mm-hmm. and .org approximately the same. And then, well, what's next? Like especially back then, there is no new GTLDs. So, like there aren't many options. So in other words, if you want a short name, this is kind of potentially one of the options that's even available for everybody worldwide. So, so I bought it. And actually, so I bought it because it was going to get some traffic, because, like effectively when something is this unique, it's going to get some traffic. And, and also let's say even, like you're even going to get kind of like almost like a catch-all for all .cc traffic. And obviously there isn't much, but if you have Jeff.cc and somebody types Jeff.cc and then he types .cc another time, Jeff.cc is effectively a subdomain of cc.cc. So you end up with a little bit small funnel there. So it was interesting. So I bought it because of that. But, so I started talking to the guys like, how'd you get these names? Because my main concern was, this was as I was buying the domain, because I was like, okay, I want to make sure that it's not stolen or some fraud going on or something.
Yeah, or VeriSign restricted them or something like that.
Yeah, and VeriSign already owned them. So I was like, how is it? No way VeriSign would sell them. He's like, yeah, I emailed the whois information, which is like some crazy like default email, like corporate@verisign.com, and they replied, and they told me it's $100 per name. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So because I also look up, so I was like, okay, let's test it if it's real. I emailed VeriSign on names that they still own, because, so 2 letters, there's obviously 26 letters, so 26 and 26, 676 possible combinations. Mm-hmm. So, so I emailed VeriSign on names that like literally to that corporate email address, to other names, and they replied to me. And they're like, yes, $100 per name. So I'm like, what the fuck does VeriSign, like even back then, it's already a company worth billions.
Yeah.
Why are they making $100 per name? And it was crazy to me because the names, so that CC's, the wholesale on them even back then was like 20 something bucks per year, like in average the renewal rate. But they're renewed like 9 years ahead. So I was like, okay, so it's not bad because you can buy it, effectively it's worth more than that in just renewals, and really you have 9 years to sell this name.
Yep.
So I like that proposition, even though like that CC, it's kind of like a weird thing.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I never would even thought of that.
So pretty much, so I buy CC, and then I tell the guy, how about I buy your other, like, forget how many at that point he had, like, already left, like 95, because he bought 100, but a few sold, like, including the one I bought. So I was like, okay, let me buy all these 95 from you, and we're like negotiating kind of like a bulk price. In the meantime, I tell VeriSign, hey, I'll buy all your other ones. And they're like, okay, sure. But the problem is that they're like, oh, but somebody already bought another 100. And I was like, fuck, somebody else. So then another guy literally did this exact same thing. Also,
Well, the word
100.
was getting out now, right? Like people talk, and then all of a
So
sudden,
another guy bought 100. Also, literally put like another post on the same forum, and he's like, yeah, I'm selling them for like, because this guy was selling them for like a couple thousand each. Second guy was selling them for like, forget, like 700 each, and VeriSign wanted 100. So I was like, okay, like the only way it makes sense for me to do it like kind of like a bulk deal is if I can get all of them, so then I can control the supply so that the pricing makes sense, right? So you can have somebody like Jeff Gabriel buy JG that for me, JG.cc for me, in order to use it like as an email shortener or something like that.
yeah.
It's like a little bit kind of like like a small utilitarian kind of like domain name. But it doesn't make sense if some other dude is selling them for hundreds of dollars. I can't charge 5,000. So anyway, long story short, I effectively negotiated with all of them simultaneously to buy all of them. And then effectively I owned the market in a way for that specific niche. So pretty much out of 676 names, I had maybe 650 of them, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And total acquisition price probably was like maybe 80,000, something like this, 100,000. So like, obviously this is like quite a bit for for the CC names, but like this was it, like this is another one of those things that like nobody can write a book about this and tell you how to do this, because it's kind of like touch and go. You have to play it out to get a feel for it, to intuitively decide whether it's worth doing or not. So anyway, so obviously I decided to do it.
When you decided, before you decided to do it, you were probably shitting your pants when you sent the money, right? And then there's also the side of it where all of it's coming together. Because usually to get all these parties and there's a lot of chatter happening to get everyone to kind of come to you and do a deal, usually somebody else slides in as well.
And also they didn't know that I was doing with it this deal with all of them simultaneously. Like it wasn't like a joint deal, because then each one would want more or whatever, like it's just too much information out there. So
main Tinder.
It was just kind of like I had to corral everybody and try to make something happen. And the end it did, and really the main reason I actually liked the deal, even though it sounds expensive for .cc names, is that I had effectively 10 years to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And until that point, I wasn't paying any overhead fees, really, because they're already renewed by VeriSign itself. So, and then once I started going, I mean, like we're selling effectively $100,000 a year, maybe something like that, worth of .cc names.
So what were you pricing them at the time?
Sorry?
What were you pricing the CC names when you got them? I mean, obviously.
So it depended on which names. Yeah, if it was very unique, maybe 10 grand. If it was kind of like medium tier, maybe like 5 grand. If it was low tier, maybe like $1,000 too. That was kind of like the pricing.
Okay.
So pretty much what ended up happening is that, like really maybe first year, effectively I make my money back. So I'm like, okay, now we're good. We can keep going. Like we have like 8 more years to sell these.
Yeah.
This is like 2010. And then this, like obviously I get lots of inquiries for the names from like random people. But then I started noticing there's more inquiries from China. And, and the problem is that they're all in Chinese. So I was kind of like, well, like, and even if I could respond to them, like, we're not using escrow.com. Like, there's just no way for me to make a deal happen,
mm-hmm.
both due to communication issues, kind of like capital movement restriction issues. There's lots of things. And also, like what anyways, I guess I'll touch on this later. So then I had this one guy, he's like, hey, I'm interested in WZ.cc. Can I have it? Because I'm a poor college student. I'm like, yeah, I've heard this
You never
before.
heard that. Yeah,
Like,
personal project for my daughter's birthday. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So I was like, yeah, I don't think so. He's like, oh, and by the way, you're pricing your .cc names incorrectly. Like I could help you sell it. I'm like, okay, well, listen, if you sell 3 for me, I'll give you this WZ.cc that you want for free. And then he sells 3 names for me in one day. And like pretty much like almost at asking price, like the prices that I had. Because also .cc names, like at least back then, there wasn't good distribution via, like you couldn't distribute them through Afternic, so they appear on GoDaddy. It's literally, people would have to email you to effectively get a response and so on. Like I had a page like it's for sale, but it was like there was no proper CRM for it or anything.
Yeah.
So then, so this is like end of 2009, beginning of 2010. So then, I was like, wow, okay, so he sold 3 names. Here, have the name, but like, maybe there's something here. So this was, effectively the beginning of my pathway towards the Chinese market. So this guy effectively, I mean, ironically, he was a college student, so he technically wasn't lying. But like effectively, me and him actually became very, very good friends, and we've done, like I don't know, even maybe 8 figures worth of business together since that point.
Is that
so?
What are you talking about?
Because really, what happened is that I was telling him, hey, like obviously you're good at this. Why don't you sell them for me? I'll give you a commission. So then what I noticed is that he was effectively, the names that I thought were bad, I don't know, let's say XG.cc.
Yeah.
He was saying they're excellent. So this was kind of like the weird trick of the Chinese market, because like all these names that we assume, like with Zs, with Xs, that are awful, or Qs especially, they're actually potentially super awesome in China.
Yeah.
So so then we kind of went down this path, but like with 2 letters, it's kind of easy because there's so few of them, and you can effectively almost commoditize them, saying that, hey, 1 2-letter is somewhat close to another 2-letter in terms of value. So this is how much you're willing to pay. So, I mean, then I ended up buying a couple of 3-letter .com portfolios, effectively with the same methodology. I think one was actually with you.
Yeah, that was when I got you into Marchex. We did a deal with
yes. So,
and I didn't understand at the time when we did the deal with Marchex, because you bought like 3 numbers or 3 letters and then 3 numbered names as well. And I remember like 757, and I'm like, yeah, that's the name of an airplane, but what else are you going to do with it? I just didn't get it. Obviously, you were getting advice, great advice from him, and you were hard on that, when we met doing that. And
so pretty much, but at the same time, these are still kind of easy, right? Because let's say 3 numbers, there's still only 1,000 of them. So if you know some data that, this one sold for X, you can kind of infer that something else is worth somewhere in the territory of X, at least potentially. So, so that's what I was kind of going after, these commodity style names that there's very easy comparables, like effectively length, and, that, let's say that all of the characters are numbers, or all the characters are letters. Those are easy to compare. But then, like effectively once, like anything that I could find in the market that was reasonably priced, I bought, and obviously we're also playing a different game, because we're buying names mainly from Westerners that didn't know that they had some nuggets there that were really meaningful Chinese, either numbers or letters, especially letters, because again, it could be something like WXQ, and like somebody is like, I'm never gonna sell it to any company, but there is a Chinese company that will love it, So these were kind of like, so the way it worked is that we would approach portfolios. We would value the portfolio in terms of what the liquid valuation of it is worth right now. Like in other words, if these names went on NameJet, let's say tomorrow, what did we go for?
Mm-hmm.
Add it all up. And then Kevin would tell me, which is my Chinese partner, like which ones would actually go for a lot more. Like in other words, sometimes the liquid valuation in the North American market or non-Chinese market would be, let's say, $5,000, but this name would actually we can liquidate for $50,000 on the Chinese market.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we would do. We would effectively arbitrage this model of acquiring a portfolio, liquidating, let's say 10% of it. This 10% pays for like 50% of the portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
So because churn was important, we needed, like, it's not like I had that much capital available. All the capital available I had was from domain parking. So, because it's not like I had like investors or anything, like it was just this. So effectively I just had to reinvest it all the time to get a compounding effect. And the faster I could do it, the better the compounding. So, and then we got into kind of like more complicated things. Like in other words, again, these commodity names are kind of easy because even somebody who's not, too knowing, they can effectively group them in one group. But then, I guess it started with Marchex. We went after, so-called pinyin names, which are effectively phonetic Chinese words, but with English, effectively Latin letter spelling.
Hold on 1 second for people. Marchex is still around. It's a publicly traded company. And at one point, they purchased either multiple or one very large portfolio of domain names, and a small subset of the portfolio was a lot of numbered names. And if I remember correctly, I think it was Yanni was the owner of the main portfolio they purchased, and they had names in it that, like he's saying, 3 numbered, 3 lettered, but they also had. I remember GED was one of their big names because online education was really big at the time. Another number that I thought was really good was 90210. Obviously, Beverly Hills. As an American, I didn't realize it, but maybe in China that wasn't valuable at all. But they had all kinds of different zip code names from all over the United States, and I probably would have gravitated to those over, 3 digits. But the 3 digits are obviously worth exponentially more. But they had a very large portfolio. So Yanni was focusing on the numbers, the 3 letters, and then the pinyin, which keep going as to what those are and what that expanded into.
Yeah, so pretty much I was going after anything that we have an edge in. And I mean, obviously, because they did buy Yanni's portfolio, there were a lot of Chinese style names in there.
Mm-hmm.
And, like the thing about Marchex, it's not like they were suckers. They were actually asking for quite a bit, and they're getting quite a bit, even for me. Like, for example, like I don't remember the exact numbers, but in terms of scale, it's true. Like, like for example, we bought like baobei.com from Marchex. I don't even remember for how much, but something like 100,000, 120,000, only because, my partner told me that we can effectively flip it for 200,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, these weren't like, like super easy deals.
You're taking a serious risk.
Yeah,
you're trusting this guy.
And really the only reason it was happening is because we had a track record, like meaning that we were doing it, and not just with Marchex, with different people all the time, consistently, meaning that if there was a failure and we weren't able to liquidate a name for what, like he said, then we would revert back and probably not go through with the next deal. But the reason it had to happen like that is because Marchex wasn't really trying to liquidate anything. They were trying to get top dollar for their names. But the thing is, there was just kind of like a disconnect between what's a top name in the Western world and what's a top name in the Chinese world. And there was no, I mean, now these worlds are more connected because there's all these
shared knowledge,
Chinese brokerages, and there's all these kind of like Chinese players that play both markets. So it's a different world now. But back then, this was brand new. This was, just happening.
So I have two questions for you. The first is, before you keep going, is I've always tended to notice that with Marchex that sometimes you get a better deal when the quarter was ending and they needed a little bump. Timing was always something important, and obviously in the entrepreneurial world was number one. And number two, if you were in your mid 20s now and kind of fell into the world now, what do you think you would be spending your time on? Because I mean, that was a very unique time in our lives and time of information.
Yeah.
But and the reality is that there's similar opportunities out there right now, and a similar amount of risk. I mean, I'm sure you got stuck holding the hot potato a few times and took some losses.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't all slam dunks. It's easy to look back at it and talk about the win.
No, yeah, of course. This was also what I'm talking about is really, this is the result of a bunch of trial and error that, like effectively anything that didn't work out, we stop the iteration. Let's say it's some names that we bought, we get rid of those names. Like, for example, I bought a bunch of names. Quickly, I ran a bunch of data sets, and I decided to buy a bunch of, so-called local services names. Like, let's say it would be something like SeattlePlumber.com, but it wouldn't be so good. Like, it wouldn't be Seattle, and maybe it wouldn't be plumber, maybe it would be plumbing.
Or like a second tier town or city.
Yeah. So it would be like effectively a second tier, and that wasn't great. And then there are some things that worked out, but were just, let's say, not worth enough. For example, I decided to go, downloaded the census data from the US, found out the top 100,000 surnames. And, really, why surnames? Because surnames are also company names, and, like, people are attached to their surname one way or another. So maybe they're willing to pay some money for it. So took those surnames, then started going down the list, checking out the websites that show up. If it's doesn't look like a big business, or if it's kind of like a relatively empty page, hit them up, see if they're interested in selling. If they're interested in selling, and price is good enough for me to take a risk on, I would buy it, and then I would effectively do the reverse. I would look up all the names that currently exist with that surname in terms of domain names, and I would contact them and be like, "You want to upgrade?" So this was effectively another game, and that wasn't a guaranteed win.
That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Get the names, gather the names of the people, the leads, the phone numbers, create a CRM. They're like, "Yeah, I'm interested." They never answer the phone again. It's a lot.
And keep in mind,
work.
This is without a CRM. So this is. I don't even think even Salesforce existed back then. This is me literally just going down the list, hoping for the best. And, really, let's say that one had, it wasn't 100% success rate. It's maybe, 50% success rate, but when there was success, it was like a 10x, so like it was so much effort that, let's say, it wasn't worth it for me, because you always have to be sensitive to the time that you have. I mean, you only have, let's say, X amount of hours per day to work on this. And I mean, effectively, I look at things in general in the form of opportunity cost, meaning that I had many times where I even had businesses that we can make something happen, and I know we can make it happen, but if I estimate my effectively time and effort that I need to put into this versus time and effort I can put into something else, it just wasn't worth it.
But
even if it ends up succeeding.
Yeah, you've had the PlayStation site you've mentioned to me, right?
Yeah.
You've had a travel website. You bought selfiestick.com, and we're going all in on that, buying selfie sticks. So when did that kind of come into play? So those are three. What happened in the travel and the PlayStation sites? Are those gone now?
Yeah, so pretty much the travel site, we had to close down because it was just bad. I mean, it was effectively it was travel to Africa, effectively African safaris. And that's just, for many, many reasons, a very tough business to be involved in. And that's, there's just so much data there that it almost has to be a podcast on its own, because it's just because there's just, there's effectively the way that the business is run, which is not efficient because, just the business takes place in places where it's not efficient. So you always need to hustle. You always need to effectively grease somebody to get things done. And it's very disappointing. And besides that, there's all these other things that are completely outside of your control. Like in other words, let's say you get everything going, everything's running smoothly, boom, terrorist attack. Okay, now you have no sales for like a year.
So when were you like, because like for the record, I sold you this travel site for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you made a big investment into it, and then after you had it, things were probably felt good at first. You're excited about it. You loved to travel at the time, and then when were you like, you know what, I got to shut this down, like just fucking forget it?
I mean, this probably took me 4 or 5 years to shut down, and I would say that if I wasn't, like really, and I mean, to be fair, it's effectively all these things are sunk costs. Like literally, the moment you buy a domain name and this domain name is no longer good, it's a sunk cost.
Yeah.
Like, like you buy ISIS.com, then ISIS comes around tomorrow, you're like, oh, fuck. Like there's just, this is just the reality of these things. And, even then I was effectively, if I wasn't so attached to trying to, to prove to myself that I can do it, I would effectively let it go faster. Because really the main problem with that is that it was, the more time it continued, like, and then Ebola happened. It's just like, it's not a great thing. And, like effectively I had the capital to fund it. And, like, so I just continued funding it. And this wasn't even kind of like my top priority. This was maybe top 5, but towards the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So it was easy for me to just kind of like push it, keep pushing it. But then at some point I just looked into it. I ran the numbers and, we closed immediately.
You just said, fuck, we're done.
Yeah. It just wasn't worth it. I mean, with the PlayStation 1, actually it was, at some point at least, the world's biggest PlayStation website, like meaning like gaming, but specifically for PlayStation. And yeah, we sold it because this business became very, very competitive. We would need to compete on content. And at the same time, content, I mean, this is one of those things, one of those businesses online that you can't really pay for content because you're competing against people that get free content, like, either through volunteers or students.
Well, and the people are so passionate about certain video games and video game series and writing about the characters and the people who built them. It's like, you can't just pay a random writer to write about it. It'll just...
Yeah, exactly. So it's both kind of like a business, a part of the business that's getting crushed by typically non-existing margins. And at the same time, it's also a big business. So you have somebody like GameSpot who's getting like all the access, all the coverage. And then if you want to compete with them, you have to actually do proper hiring, get a bunch of people on overhead, go to conferences. And again, like, to me, the reason I liked it is because effectively it was getting like 30, 50,000 visitors per day. And it was like, I don't know, top 10,000 site in the world in general at some point. So it was cool. Like, you just had a lot of reach. But once you actually had to, hire a bunch of people and commit to overhead, like, it wasn't really what I was interested in. So effectively, but we sold that one. So it wasn't really, that one was effectively a net even. The travel site was bad. And the selfie stick was also bad. So that one is interesting, I think, because, like, that one was maybe the first time that I was actually selling physical products, because like travel, even though technically it's a product that people experience physically, there is no physical product. I don't have to ship anything to anybody. They themselves, take possession of the product/service when the time arrives. But
so before you get into Selfie Stick, right? So with Kenya.com, you learned as an entrepreneur, you took it off the chin, your investment and your time. You realized at the end of that you got to cut bait sooner than later, right? That was really the main lesson. If things aren't looking grim, don't just keep going. Like, you got to change, you got to pivot in some way. right? It depends
Yeah.
what the numbers are, right?
And you know what? Actually, on that one, I'm pretty sure it was possible for me to actually get some traction and turn around and kind of actually compete with some of the big, effectively, you know, like just online travel sellers. But it was one of those things that was both not that interesting on a macro level, and it was just the amount of effort that I would need to put into this. If I put this effort into something else that I both enjoy more and just has a lot more opportunity, effectively you're getting like 10, 100x more revenue out of it.
Yeah.
So it's just like it's not a business that I wanted to be in, especially effectively at that point, because after those 5 years, it was also just by happenstance, it was when the margins got squeezed into almost nothing. So, and this happens a lot online.
And almost everywhere it does. And then the other one is buying the city and then the service word. When did you like? When
Yeah. So for example, that one, like I did it, like I don't even have the data, but let's call it maybe 5,000 names. I
Yeah.
did it on, like improved iterations and so on. And that one was just a pure failure. I mean, like there is a chance for effectively with improvements that was going to get better, but it wasn't, because effectively this specific thing was just not generating enough revenue for me. So effectively at some point, like we effectively deleted, let old names expire, except like, I don't know, 50 that actually had something going, like some traffic or something.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, took the loss and moved on.
How much money do you have into that you just kind of like go out the window?
That one would be effectively just the cost of registration and also my time. So the cost of registration, maybe you're talking about 50 grand. My time, I don't really know, but like disproportionate amount, like it's not worth it. Even if we had, like really zero cost in the form of capital, I would consider it to be almost as big of a loss.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that, like I'm doing all these things all the time. Like it's not like I'm like, oh, this is a great idea, it will work, and then it works. No, I think there's these 10 great ideas, and then I just remove all the strugglers and all the failures, and we follow through with the ones that work, and also the ones that don't work but have a potential to work if we effectively, change the variables a little bit.
Yeah. So what do you think looking back at that? You probably knew you didn't want to be in inside sales. Wasn't your cup of tea as a salesperson, or what do you think from that when you're like, this sucks?
Well, that one was it's just the market wasn't like, effectively there's just not enough value left on the market, because what I was going for is reg fee names. And reg fee names is effectively one of the toughest things you can do, especially reg fee names for the purpose of sales. Because what you're doing then, effectively, you're competing against the market. Like if a name is available, this is the market's way of crowdsourcing information and tell you nobody's willing to pay $10 for it.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're effectively telling the market, no, market, you're wrong. I'm going to pay $10 for it, and I'm going to make 20 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very difficult thing to do, because effectively all like 8 billion people on earth can register this domain, and everybody effectively is saying no, either, explicitly or implicitly. And for you to actually turn around, I mean, the only way it works is if you have some good data sources, like perhaps some traffic data sources. You have some sort of, like your own kind of like trend lines that you can see that, like right now it's not popular, but later it will be. Or if it's just like some other kind of like edge, like without an edge, it's tough. And a lot of the edges are just not good enough to be able to justify registering them.
Yeah. Okay, got it. So let's get back to Selfie Stick. So you bought Selfie Stick.
Yeah. So that one was an interesting one, because again, like I wasn't like, hey, I want to be in the business of selling selfie sticks or anything. But back then, selfies were becoming big. I mean, I feel like I feel like I'm so old even just talking about it. This is maybe
Well, it was when I was in Cayman.
2000.
When I was in Cayman, you started Selfie Stick, and I moved down
Yeah,
to Cayman in 2013. I'm
yeah,
thinking just
this is maybe
14,
2014, something like that.
14. Yeah, I think that was when it was.
So yeah, so selfies are becoming big. I guess the frontal camera of the iPhone is becoming good, and so on. So obviously, selfie sticks were becoming all the rage.
Yeah.
So like you would effectively, like, this happens. Obviously, some domains that were nothing domain become huge.
Yep.
So suddenly selfiestick.com was for sale. I forget, in some brokerage, maybe. I don't know who was selling it, but I liked it because, not really because of the traffic, but because the search volume for the keyword selfie stick was just exploding. Like, it went from like zero to, at that point, like hundreds of thousands of searches a month just in the US. So really what that meant to me is that if we can make a website that we can sell selfie sticks on, especially if we can brand it that selfie stick is actually kind of like a unique.
It was the absolute peak was on May 2015, April, May.
Okay, yeah, so this makes sense. Yeah, so it started in 2014. It was just like skyrocketing. So it's me and a buddy of mine decided to kind of buy it and develop it into a selfie stick retailer. And if you have a domain name like this, the logic goes that people will assume that you're the point of authority, especially because people would not know, like, is this a generic term? Is this actually where the selfie sticks originally come from? And and everyone else are just copying them. Like, just this uncertainty actually gives you value, because one thing for sure is that you have selfiestick.com, so that must mean that you're somebody, whereas everybody else is potentially nobody.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then we're like, hey, like 100,000, like, it was a couple 100,000 searches a month just in the US, and we're like, wow, this is great. We're going to be able to dominate the SEO on it, and then also do SEM and so on. So we buy the domain, we paid, I don't even remember, like $40,000, something like this for it. And then we decided to put like a Shopify page. But before that, we're like, okay, let's figure out how to, because we never dealt with physical products, how to get self-esteem, like, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
Well, no, so we could, so with selfie sticks, because it was such a new product, you couldn't drop ship it. Like, no one of those automated drop shippers really had it. And back then, there's actually a lot less drop shippers. It's also not really like now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're like, okay, let's go and do it the proper way. We go to AliExpress, we look it up. We're like, okay, let's see who to buy it from. But the problem is that with AliExpress is, well, not really with AliExpress, but so both me and my partner, we live in Canada, but the reality is that most of our market is going to be US. We cannot be shipping from Canada to the US because just in the shipping cost and effectively all the customs and all the stuff, effectively your margin goes to zero. So we are planning on selling selfie sticks for like $40 or so.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. But keep in mind, back then, since it was very, very new, even on AliExpress, buying them in bulk, like, it was something like $8.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted like $40, so then we can reduce the price, and and we're also going to pay for traffic. So like, really, we would maybe end up with an $8 margin on every selfie stick, especially because the shipping and effectively that in itself was already like $5 to be able to ship it anywhere in the US. But the problem is that would be if we were in the US, but we're not in the US. So we're like, okay, how do we do this? Then we're about to go down this path. Like, we don't want to involve you or anybody else I know. Be like, hey, can you receive a bunch of selfie sticks, a crate of selfie sticks to your house?
And then what do you do with it? I'm supposed to drop ship them all for you? Like, it's just...
Well, yeah. Well, we would probably, it's very complicated. So then we're like, okay, let's go down this pathway of, because there's even back then now there's a lot more of them, but even back then there is services kind of like an automated warehouse where you ship it, somebody quickly receives it in an automated fashion, and they drop ship it on your behalf with your own instructions. Like there's a way to do it. But the problem is that once we're like, okay, so you buy 1,000 selfie sticks at a time, we do all this, it still ends up being more expensive per selfie stick than if you just buy them on eBay. Because on eBay, you can buy a selfie stick for $10 delivered to the door.
Yeah.
And we're like, you know what? So first of all, I go on eBay and I buy all the selfie sticks I could find. Like, I mean, keep in mind, like effectively it was like 8 selfie sticks that were even available at the time. And like effectively it was really 4 different ones, you know, like just 2 different people were selling them as something else, but they're all kind of like very similar.
Yeah.
So really it was 4 unique kinds, and one guy was really dominating. Like effectively he had like all these selfie sticks. So I'm like, I called, so I, you know, like I chat with him, and I'm like, I asked to speak with him on the phone. So I called this guy and I'm like, listen, what if I buy a bunch of selfie sticks from you one at a time? And it's just like, instead of shipping them to one address, just ship them to different ones. Every time I'm going to buy it, I'm going to put a different shipping address and you ship them there. He's like, sure. So then the way it played out is that literally, let's say Jeff Gabriel goes on selfiestick.com, buys, you know, a selfie stick. This shows up on our Shopify, and then Nick would take this and go on ebay.com and buy that selfie stick from that guy. So because
sounds like a really nice business.
So there was no way to even automate it back then. Like there was some way, but it was like all very
much work.
So then we were doing that, and I mean, at some point it was doing okay. Like we were doing like, I don't know, $500 a day in selfie sticks. But you know, like there's just a lot of trial and error, so much that all the trial effectively ate up into our profit, even when it was working.
When did Nick call you and say, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not typing in these orders"?
Well, like it wasn't just Nick, because we also had like some other people helping us, and you know, like it was both me and Nick, and also this whole exercise. Like, I mean, you know, like in a way, it was still good because it was interesting. Like, I mean, like you can't pay for this type of degree, you know, like you gotta do it to know all the nuances of both what this means and what can happen if you're gonna do something else that's perhaps similar, perhaps not even similar.
Mm-hmm.
Just knowing all the potential issues that you're gonna run into, all the potential things that can go wrong, you know, like all this data helps you to make better decisions, even when it's not really related. So what ended up happening there is that as we were effectively just getting some traction, you know, and effectively at that point, the keyword selfie stick, I think it peaked at like 1 million searches a month. As we were just starting to get some SEO and some SEM, the keyword started going down. And the other problem happened is that, like, because I guess our long-term goal was, if this continues, we effectively create our own branded selfie stick and make it effectively very high quality, and then we become the selfie stick and everybody else are just copies. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the market headed in a different direction. The market effectively commoditized selfie sticks, and you know, like effectively in the same way that you go to a store, you buy a gallon of milk, you don't really know. I mean, you may have a favorite brand, but you don't really care. You know, like it's not like you're like, hey, I'm gonna buy only milk from this company, and you go to their website and you order it and you pay a premium of 10x for it. You know, like, so at that point, you know, selfie sticks started being for sale in CVS, in Walmart, in the dollar stores.
You also had at the same time fidget spinners. It was the exact same time.
No, fidget, I thought it was later for some reason.
You think so? Maybe it was like a year later, fidget spinners?
But either way, you know, selfie stick was just kind of like a lot more utilitarian. So it was way bigger in terms of volume, at least in terms of searches. But the problem is that, again, the market effectively told us no. Both, you know, it suddenly became hard to sell something like this for $40, $20. Like we were just reducing price to keep up. at some point we could only really sell it at the same cost that we're getting it at,
Mm-hmm.
because again, suddenly became available everywhere in every dollar store. Like it just like was one of those items at the checkout counter, kind of like right there. So nobody's buying these online, like the same way buying batteries online, really. So so effectively sales went down, and then also volume was going down at the same time in terms of demand for this product. So it's first we're like, okay, kind of like still continue, but we're like, at some point we're like, okay, this is definitely not worth the effort, because even if the trends reverse, there's just not enough money for us in this. And and then like we quickly turned off the site and liquidate the name. And I think we got like, I don't know, maybe 10 grand for it, and moved on.
Do you think with the sales you made, the money you spent, the money you lost on the site and everything, do you think you guys lost money when it was all over?
Yeah, for sure we lost money. I mean, I don't know how much money we lost. Probably not much, because there were the sales to counter it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe 10 grand, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we broke even. It's hard to say, but yeah.
Yeah. On our in my own business with saw.com, when I left Uniregistry and launched the domain brokerage, obviously been selling domains, but one of the other products we got involved with selling is Adult Block. And we did that because we were doing some work with MMX, and they talked to me about selling the Adult Block. And I ended up hiring somebody from Uniregistry, because Uniregistry stopped selling Adult Block. And I thought, okay, this is a win. We can go to a lot of these major corporations and offer them the block. And, he was working full time on it in a premium plus, which is like one term is $5,000, and it gives them 10 years of protection against .xxx, porn, sex, those extensions. And I thought we could make a pretty good amount of money on it. But after like doing it for about a year and a half and building the tab in the website, trying to buy traffic for it, we got banned by Google because they thought we were trying to advertise pornography. They weren't happy with us for a while. The headache there. Building the lead list, paying the companies that scrape and find leads and the people that work there, and then calling and emailing and all that stuff. By the end of it, and paying the sales people to work on it, it just wasn't worth it, right? So you just stop really pushing it, and you just realize at that point in time that a lot of the times is like it was a calculated decision, and it made sense based on the things that you see in the market and what's happening. But when you're done with it, you know that it was time to kind of cut it loose, and there's really two things I've learned from it. Is the first is that, like you said before, you got to know when to kind of like walk away a little bit, but the other thing is really the path of least resistance. And in the end, it's like, I'm really good at selling domains. At one point I was good at selling loans, but I have no interest in going back to selling loans or software solutions or any of the other things that I've done. I just know that in the amount of time I have in a day to provide my business, I'm the best at helping the salespeople I work with get deals finished and sales finished for our clients, and then obviously working on building new technologies, parlor tricks, and things to help create more business. And I think, like after you did Selfie Stick, have you really dabbled in some more of these little side things that haven't really panned out, or have you?
I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess,
right?
I mean, not really. I guess at some point I did zone in on the things that I'm better in. Like, effectively, with enough failures, I kind of decided on what I prefer to concentrate on, because like other things can work out. Sometimes they do, but if there is a high chance of failure, then I kind of stay away from them at this point in time. I mean, like let's say we bought software.org, we had a whole plan of developing it, but then it was kind of like not really working. I mean, we're kind of only passively working on it. And then somebody came and wanted to buy the domain for effectively 10 times more than we paid. And we're just like, okay, that's an easy way to let go.
But that's a keyword that is slowly dying. I mean, if you compare that to
Yeah,
application,
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah. I
it's
mean, the other, I guess, the interesting part about it is that it was a very old domain name. It's one of the maybe one of the earliest .orgs ever. It's like 1987 registration. So
wow.
I knew it's going to be valuable for almost like historical reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And then this just happens. I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah. Well, then there was also there's another interesting story that you and I are actually involved in together was the sale of peekaboo.com. Right. So
Yeah.
how did you end up with that domain? Did you buy that in a portfolio or on its own in a drop auction? How did you get it? Do you
I
remember?
don't really remember that one. How maybe portfolio.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I don't really keep track of like individual names like this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, effectively, I more keep track of names that don't perform because I'm very stringent about getting them out of my portfolio.
Yeah.
Meaning that if a name is performing, I just keep it in the pile and kind of let it do its thing. But if a name is not performing, I don't want to pay effectively the renewal for it. I don't want to have it effectively in the form of opportunity cost because you can, if the name is valuable, you can always liquidate it and get capital in exchange. So, that's why I don't really keep track against that much of names that we have in our portfolio that are performing.
How many names do you think you let go in a year or a month?
A lot. I mean, yeah, we have something between 50 to 100,000 domains. And this varies a lot. I mean, like we would buy, let's say, a portfolio of 10,000 names. And, maybe we would get rid of 20,000 names, maybe of 5,000 names. I mean, I think, at least for me, maybe the most important part is for the portfolio to be dynamic and to have feedback loops to the domains in such a way that I know that whether or not something performs. Because let's say you have like something like mug.com and it's in your portfolio, and let's say it's getting some inquiries, but is this enough inquiries for typically the kind of like a surface level value that this domain conveys? Meaning that, let's say if you liquidate this domain tomorrow, obviously it would go for some cash. Could you do something better with that capital than invest in mug.com? Maybe you're better off investing in another domain, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the types of things that I always think about, because the most important part is effectively a better rate of return. So like it doesn't really matter how you think about it, like whether it's an ROI or whatever or an IRR. I mean, it's really reflects the same concept, because effectively, if you aren't doing as well as you could be, you're paying that in the form of you're paying for that inefficiency in the form of interest to yourself. So, meaning that, let's say if you have $1 million worth of domains and they're generating, let's say, $100,000 worth of cash flow. Let's say, assuming let's say you don't lose any value in a year by year basis. Currently, you're making 10%. So some people are going to say, hey, 10% is better than the market, the market rate of 5%, let's say, the current market. But for me, I'm taking it kind of like to next stage. Okay, yes, it's better than the market rate. I mean, that has to happen in order for that to even be viable. And I'm talking about better, like in terms of like a mix of cash flow and, let's say, increase in equity of that portfolio. But I think what should be happening is actually more like, can you buy any better set of names for $1 million? Because if you could have a set of names that generate $150,000 worth of names, worth of revenue instead of 100, then actually what you're doing by not being dynamic and by keeping this exact same portfolio that generates 100,000, you're effectively willing to take a loss of 50,000 in the form of opportunity cost. So, like, so whatever is the best pathway for capital investment in a particular business, anything that's the second best, you're already accruing an unrealized cost, really, cost that you're not even aware of.
Well, it's interesting for me as a broker to sit and people send me a list of their names and they say, "What do you think of your names?" Right? And some of the investors that I've worked with have invested a lot of money in GTLDs, and as we know, in some cases, in some of these extensions and whatever it has really paid off in spades. But at the same time, some of these investors are paying because they're premium names. $100 a year, $200 a year, $500 a year, $1,000 a year to carry some of these, and they've paid this for like 4 or 5 years, and they're paying $100K a year in renewals, and they're not making any sales, or the sales they're making is really minimal. And when you tell them they're nice names, but they're not very liquid, and good luck getting these prices you're thinking, and they're saying, well, this sold in the market for that, and this sold in the market for that. I kind of feel like I feel bad for them because they just don't want to. It's like the person in blackjack who just keeps losing, and they just keep going and saying, well, I got to dig myself out of this hole. And it just keeps happening rather than just kind of cutting bait. Right. And it just gets like worse and worse. And some of these folks I talk to, and sadly enough, it gets more desperate in some ways, and they get angry.
I mean, to me, like, okay, I guess the one way to think about it is also like a little bit philosophical. Like, what's the point of even being a domainer? Effectively, what we're doing is we're inserting liquidity to a market that otherwise has almost zero liquidity. Like, if you have even a very efficient portfolio that you're just doing end user sales, you're looking at like 1% a year worth of sales.
Yeah.
So that means that 99% of your names are not liquid. So that's why there is a market, why there is demand, and why like we effectively are doing this, because our job is to insert liquidity in places that there is no liquidity. Now, but you cannot insert liquidity while at the same time not getting any liquidity at any point yourself. Like, this cannot be the plan, because it can just be a black hole of capital. Like, you can continually put money in if there is no pathway to get it out. I mean, maybe if there is a pathway at least, and then you can decide how likely this pathway is. But without anything and just kind of like YOLOing it, hoping for the best, I mean, that's probably not a great scenario.
It's not. Hope is not a good business plan. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Well, yeah, and also, like, let's say, so after the Chinese names, the main thing I got into was actually kind of like generic names, like I don't know, let's say redgiraffe.com and stuff like this. Like, the hardest part was effectively figuring out what's valuable, why it's valuable, and to what extent it's valuable. Because, like, I mean, we can all say, let's say something like jeff.com is valuable. Okay. But that one is easy because, like, it's very prime, first name, it's short, it's got all the things going for it. And to be fair, these names are very rare. Like, I mean, like, when you're talking about, like, maybe these are like, this is one of those names that's in the top, I don't know, 10,000 names in existence.
Yeah.
So, okay, of course. But once you get to kind of like, let's say, the millionth down the line, this is when things get tough, because it's worth either zero, which means it's actually a liability because you're actually going to keep renewing it, and
as a carrying cost, nothing on it. It's just
exactly, yeah.
Yep.
Or it's worth something, and this means this nuance is very, very important. So effectively, let's say for me, I went down this pathway to effectively create my own system to make this decision, because it seemed to me that this is one of those things that somehow nobody on the market was doing. This is why when you see even professional domainers, they have a portfolio of, let's say, 10,000 names. I mean, if I look at it, at least on face value, let's say, without knowing, like, some, maybe some names have incredible offers, maybe some names have some traffic that's,
Well, there's no hard
not
there's no
expected.
hard and fast rules in our business. There's exceptions a lot,
Yeah,
right? To a lot of
yeah. So, but anyways, I'm saying like, but the exceptions would be very, very small, and still I wouldn't, let's say, renew 90% of the portfolio. Like, this is, I think, maybe the biggest detriment of this business, because people are just not judgmental enough, or like, or even if they are, they're just not sure what the nuances are to be able to make basically a call whether something is valuable or not. I think if you want to succeed kind of like in this business being a domainer, the number one thing you can do is get super good at understanding why something is valuable and exactly how valuable it is. Because let's say if you know that Jeff.com, even let's say even something as simple as Jeff.com, if you know that's valuable and it's available for sale for 20 grand, let's say I hear it, I take it right now without even looking at the data. If I had the data, I would be able to, probably push it further how much I'm willing to pay. But, so really, let's say at the end of the day, somebody's maybe willing to pay 200 grand for Jeff.com. So if you're able to get it for, let's say, 50, this is the type of move that people should be doing. Like, effectively, if I'm starting in this business now, there's kind of like two constraints in this business. One is capital, like without, let's say, knowledge. One is capital, and one is time that you're able to spend on it. So if you notice that everybody who's kind of like in this business for a long time and kind of like quote unquote the big domainers, they really have an excess of capital. So they have a big portfolio, effectively has a big overhead cost in the form of opportunity cost of that capital if they were to liquidate a portfolio. But they don't have much time. So because they're just one person, they can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
But people who are starting effectively would have the exact opposite constraint. So maybe they would have, let's say, $10,000 to use to be able to buy domains, but they have all the time in the world. So they can do a ton of research. They can email like thousands of people until they find, let's say, a domain for 10,000 that they know is worth 20,000 in the market. They can buy, they can sell it. Boom. Effectively, that same day that they sell it, if they buy the same day, effectively it's 100% ROI in one day. So, and then you have 20,000. Suddenly you have better constraints now. Suddenly now you have more capital to play with. But again, the more aware you are of what makes a good domain name, and especially how good, the less risky this endeavor is.
I mean, when I worked for Frank, he had 365,000 names, right? And we would probably sell 100 of them on a good month of his names. And his portfolio, surprisingly, was a lot of two-word.coms. He didn't have a ton of big one-word.coms. He had a lot of two-word.coms, but for some reason, almost every single day, one of those two-word.coms, multiple times over, it would be a name we didn't know he even owned. It would get its first inquiry ever, and that person really wanted the name, and we'd end up selling it for like $5,000 to $7,000 to them on average, right? And we priced them really high, and I think we blew away a lot of people with that initial price, and I think we should have started a little lower because a lot of people aren't accustomed to the way we do it in the domain business at times, where you price it at 15, but you'll take 7,500. But yeah, his sell-through rates were actually quite low with what you're talking about, but our average prices were exponentially higher. And I think if you evaluated his portfolio, have you evaluated the portfolio? I don't know if you did in the past when he was shopping in a
I mean, yeah, at some point I've looked at it, and look, I guess I have a little bit of a different
right?
outlook. So in other words, because I find that domainers, small and big, they're kind of scared to get rid of a chunk of their portfolio because they think they're flushing money down the toilet. But for me, especially so how there's effectively this common 80-20 rule that effectively that 20% of the portfolio is actually resulting in 80% of the revenue.
Or higher, yeah.
So technically in the domain business, it's even higher. It's probably like 90-10.
Yeah.
And I would argue it's even higher for portfolios that are less optimized. So the less optimized the portfolio, the more true it is. So really what it really means to me is that you can take a portfolio that's got like, say, 100,000 names. It's not optimized. Probably 10% of the, like 10,000 names are producing most of the revenue, either now or in the future. So in other words, they have the potential to produce that revenue. So technically, I'm pretty sure you can remove, let's say, 90% of the names and end up with almost the same cash flow without all the overhead. So that's effectively my style of operating. Now, like I'm biased because I think that's the correct style, and I would probably, argue that that's the most efficient by far in terms of capital allocation. But like it is more, I don't know what to call it, like more intense. It's more dynamic. It requires more micromanaging and paying attention to what's going on. And not only that, it requires a constant reevaluation, because I had names that were really good before, they had a lot of inquiries, and now they're going down because things change online all the time. Like again, like how we talked about, say the keyword software was good before, it's bad now. Because it's just at some point some keywords become meaningless. At some point, some keywords become meaningless and then valuable again. So like to me, effectively, what I care about is how valuable potential keyword, or not keyword, potential domain name is now. And that's what I'm going to make my valuation on. I'm not really predicting, I guess, the future that much, because, like you could do it, but it just becomes too risky. It seems like less risky to just be able to buy more domains that are good right now.
But let me ask you this, right? So if you saw a selfie stick pop up in a drop auction today, would you even bid on it? Or is it just so dead now that you just like forget it?
Well, yeah, so technically it's dead, like there's lots of things. So I personally don't really bid in auctions anymore. We effectively have bots that bid. And, like there's very rarely super big names that come up in auctions.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, effectively, I rely on the bot to bid exact amount of, how effectively valuable we see it. So now at selfiestick.com, it's not worth zero, but it's not worth, I would argue, probably not worth thousands. It's maybe worth.
So you don't even read the
hundred
list anymore. You don't do any of it. It's all done by a bot. Everything.
Yes, but also, keep in mind when I say something is worth something, I'm talking about the wholesale value, because again, this is an illiquid business, so it doesn't make sense of valuing stuff based on effectively the end user sales that are illiquid sales that happen on a very small percentage of names. That's effectively almost like a cash flow feature of this business.
Mm-hmm.
So really the way I look at values is more about liquidation tomorrow. What does it go for? And this is why, this is why you see, let's say something like Namejet. I mean, yeah, sometimes you're going to get somewhat end user style sales there, but it's very rare.
Mm-hmm. So when you were setting up the bot, have you woken up one morning and it's just bidding out of control and you've wasted loads of money?
Yeah. Like, I mean, this is
what happened there.
This is one of those. Yeah, so there's lots of bugs. We had lots of times where, and the worst ones is more when we had, let's say, some criteria of, let's say, some commodity names like 4 letters that were bidding this much for these types of letters and patterns. And, let's say I don't pay attention for a while, and the trends change, the valuations change, and suddenly the bot starts winning like a bunch of them every day. And only when
someone's just unloading all their trash on you, and you're
either somebody, or like it's like when people buy domains, let's say like actually register domains, they register effectively potentially in bulk too. Like in other words, let's say when 4 letters were disappearing from the market, people were literally like rushing to register the last of them at reg fee.
Yep.
And then let's say if this person disappeared, died, stopped being in the business, doesn't care, a million different reasons for domains to expire, they're also going to expire in the exact same pace. So, like, unfortunately, this can happen. But yeah, that's the cost of doing business. I mean, that's the cost of having the bot, because I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, and
So
you're stuck with the hot potato 100 times
yeah,
over, and then you got to tweak it.
but you know what? The reason I'm also not too concerned, because I also have my own liquidation mechanisms to be able to list names that we don't want to keep long term. So in other words, when let's say when we buy a bunch of names, unless it's a very bad bug, usually these names are resellable, because I try to not buy names that don't have wholesale value of at least, let's say, $80 or $70, because I don't want a name that has a wholesale value of $20, because then I'm going to need to, or let's say $10, because then I'm going to need to pay $10 a year to renew it, and that's too big of effectively an upkeep cost in the form of effectively it's a tax. So tax compared to property value effectively it's too big of a ratio, and then I'm not interested. So as a result, I'm only going for names. I mean, my prime target is actually more like kind of like couple $100 names, because those are kind of like easier for me. That even if the valuation then goes down, let's say goes down from 300 to 200, it's still 200, because if it goes down from like 100 to $20, those names are effectively not resellable.
Trash.
Unless you're doing it in a very manual way, and then again, it's also not working. So as a result, those names we effectively really just dump.
Mm-hmm. So you've obviously bought plenty of names by accident, and then when their renewal comes up, you're just like, see you later, and you're just taking it off.
Yeah. I mean, we also like buy portfolios, let's say thousands of names that they either had traffic and now they don't have as much, or we bought the whole portfolio, but then like effectively with enough data analysis, we decide that we don't want to keep like 1/3 of it. And, some of these portfolios, like they're hundreds of thousands of dollars, so 1/3 of it is gone. But it's kind of like more complicated than that, because technically you're buying everything in a portfolio, but that, let's say, some names are more valuable. So it's not as simple as we're just actually dumping it. But the point is that this is actually just one of the aspects of running a very dynamic portfolio. Mm-hmm. Because you have to be able to churn it. You have to be able, like, the more you have your emotions interfere with the process, the more you're going to lose. So in other words, if you're like, oh damn, I paid $1,000 for it, I got no inquiries, I don't want to hold it, and if I liquidate it, I'm like on Namejet or something, I'm only gonna get $200. Like, my argument is like, you already lost the $800. What you're doing right now is deciding whether or not you want to liquidate a non-performing name.
Yeah.
And how much you paid for it, effectively, that's why I'm saying that anytime you buy a domain name, it's already a sunk cost. Everything is a sunk cost, and now you're dealing with the aftermath. So sometimes the aftermath is good and you get an end user sale, or even just the wholesale value goes up. Sometimes the aftermath is bad, but in a way it's irrelevant how much you paid, because you're not going back and undoing the deal. Mm-hmm. So all you can do is with what you have now. And like, the more you interfere with the process of being able to liquidate bad names because like they're bad and so on, the more you're actually costing yourself more money, at least in the form of renewals, so overhead, but probably also in the form of opportunity cost. Because let's say even if you get $100 per name, and you got, like, let's say 100 names like that, it's $10,000. You can take that $10,000, invest it in something else that performs, and like, churn it.
Yeah, turn it into something else and not be too proud to just take it off the chin and move on.
Yeah, exactly. So something like pride can interfere with the process.
I actually told this story at dinner parties, and when people ask me what we do or what I do, and I talk about, I'm like a realtor for domain names, and in some cases we get in these situations where we talk to companies or individuals, and they say, we have this much to spend on a domain name, and we're looking for a cool brand name, and this is an idea of the product. And one of the deals I put together was peekaboo.com, which was owned by you, and it was done on a payment plan. And I don't remember the terms, but it was over a year or 2 year payoff for a pretty considerable amount of money. And I remember the buyer being quite a nice gentleman. I feel like you try to picture people when you're on the phone with them, what they look like, because we weren't really doing Zoom. This was in like 2013, 14, somewhere, maybe like 12, maybe doing that deal. Um, so we came to terms on peekaboo.com. The payment plan began. And then they paid, I'd say, 2/3 of the price throughout the payment plan, right? A good.
No, no, I think they finished it super early.
So
Yeah.
you don't think you still own it because it has the purchase link.
No, I do own it, yeah, but they, like, so here's how it kind of like how I remember that it played out. So this company comes, like they don't want to pay like what our asking price is. They don't want to give anything close to it, but they actually wanted to give us stock.
Yeah.
And I'm like, stock in this company, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Oh, so it's kind of like Instagram, but like I didn't get it at all. And I was like, nah, no stock for me, thanks. Let's do a payment plan. So then they do the payment plan, and I don't really remember, I guess, but I was pretty sure it ended quickly. I thought it ended a couple payments in, even though it was, like a year or 2 years. Yeah, so they defaulted. They didn't end it. They just stopped paying. So we're like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess let's undo the whole thing. And then in my head, I was thinking like, oh, I knew it wasn't going to work because it was a stupid business anyways. And then I look and I'm like, oh, they rebranded to Snapchat. What a stupid name.
Yeah, and they bought it on Biodomains. I think they bought it on Biodomains for like $3,000. I remember there's like an article,
Yeah.
And that was an interesting, a really interesting one. And I always find that to be, pretty cool. And then I say, can you imagine if it was called Peekaboo? And honestly, I kind of find like that would have targeted young kids, and you probably it wouldn't have been as successful as Snapchat. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I don't really think of a girl in a bikini saying Peekaboo. That's kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, it is kind of creepy. I mean, yeah, it probably was the right move. And of course, like, I mean, like ideally I would have taken the stock instead. But, like these types of things, I think there is a lot, like, I think I have a lot more of like, besides mistakes of all these things I would have done, but I didn't. Like I remember even with these .cc names, because back then my Chinese partner tells me, hey, you should contact this one guy has a bunch of one-layer .cc names. We get them, we can flip them for like 70 grand each. Because at that point the two-layer .ccs were actually getting quite hot in China. So ironically, if I kept them all, this would be worth a lot more. But so then I contact this guy. He was somewhere close to me, and I was like, let's meet up. And he's like, just chatting on phone. All the one-layer .ccs were either redirecting to bitcoin.org or they had a Bitcoin landing page. And I was like, what is this Bitcoin thing? This is like 2011 maybe. And this guy, I'm like talking to him. I'm like, okay, look, we'll give you like 20 grand, 30 grand for these names per name. You should do the deal because, in the back of my head, I know, like, okay, my guy said that in China we can liquidate for so and so. And he just cannot stop going off on this Bitcoin thing. He's like, nah, I'm not interested. I need a lot more money than that. It's not worth it for me. But, have you heard about Bitcoin? And I'm like, wow, what's this Bitcoin thing? Sounds like a scam.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you make some real money? And I mean, back then, Bitcoin is like literally in the single dollars.
Yeah.
And
what year was this? Like 2010, 2009, right?
2011, something like this. Yeah. So then I was like, oh man, this guy is wasting his time. If only he made, he was actually willing to do a deal on these .cc names and make some real money. So, I mean, I have a bunch of other ones like this that is just like, oh my God, like in hindsight, I'm a big time genius, but like, it's one of these things that you have to go through. You go through enough iterations and everything is, you get a little bit of everything. Successes, potential successes, a ton of failures,
Missed
everything.
opportunities, like you said. I mean, I always feel like if you look back, you can always see the crumbs or the hints the world gave you that you should have taken that were around you, right? But at the same time, the guy who offered you Bitcoin, and then same with Snapchat offering you stock, there was 500 others that were really fucking bad that you'd forgotten about.
Of
I mean,
course.
in the domain
Yeah.
business, how many entrepreneurs offer you stock in their shitty business, and you're just like, no.
Of course, all the time. Like that's
Yeah.
really the context. I mean, like you should see how many domains we sell, and they don't even change the parking page. Not to mention a blank page. A blank page is almost like an advancement because they actually bother changing the DNS. Like most of the time, all these plans don't pan out, and the plans are just so stupid that you're actually baffled that somebody even came up with them, and they have the capital to buy your domain name.
Oh, it's
So
amazing.
that's why it's really like that, because you see all these other things that now, like, I don't even remember individual instances of these companies because it just happens every day, and it's just so often that nothing gets done.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why it's so hard when something real comes to be able to distinguish it at an early stage, because like it kind of blends with the rest of it.
Yeah. And you're right. And it's hard to kind of get through the noise. So on that note, talking about missed opportunities, thank you very much for being my first guest on this. And I'm excited to see how this turns out and how it's received by our colleagues and others in the industry. So thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.